At 6:30 every morning, Frank would sit quietly on the edge of his bed, his eyes heavy, his body heavier. The world outside his window was waking up, but inside something felt stuck. He wasn't in pain exactly, but his knees creaked, his breath was shallow, and the roundness around his middle, his belly, seemed to grow a little more each month. He used to believe it was just part of getting older, that this slowing down, this thickening of the waist, this quiet exhaustion was inevitable. But something deeper was happening, something he couldn't name. What Frank didn't know is that the real weight gain had already started before he opened his eyes. His body had already made a decision. Without him, it would store fat today, not burn it. It's a silent shift that happens to many people over 75. The older body becomes sensitive, less forgiving of late nights, of processed foods, of stress. But the most dangerous thing? It becomes less responsive to morning. Morning used to be when your body naturally burned the most energy. It was a reset button. But now, without the right cues, the metabolism no longer wakes up fully. And instead of burning fat for fuel, the body hoards it, especially around the belly. That's why the moment between waking up and breakfast became the turning point in Frank's story. Not the gym, not a diet, not a miracle pill, but this overlooked hour. Frank had been skipping over it for years. He would wake up, feel stiff, shuffle to the kitchen, pour a coffee, sit, wait for his appetite, wait for energy, wait for something to change. But nothing ever did. He blamed himself, quietly. Thought maybe he didn't have discipline. Maybe he was just too old. But none of that was true. The truth was simpler and more hopeful. His body wasn't lazy. It was just missing a signal. You see, our metabolism doesn't wake up just because we do. It needs to be told. It's morning. It's time to move. It's time to burn. Without that message, especially after 75, the body defaults to conservation. It slows down everything. It holds on to fat. It creates inflammation. And that gentle tiredness Frank felt, that wasn't normal aging. That was his body stuck in storage mode. And this is where everything begins to shift. When Frank changed what he did in the first 20 minutes of his day, everything started to feel different. His belly softened. His steps felt lighter. Even his face changed. Less puffiness, more energy in his eyes. Not because of a workout, not because of willpower, but because he gave his body what it had been waiting for, all along. Frank didn't mean to sit so much. It just happened. One minute he was sipping his coffee, and the next, it was 10 a.m. The newspaper still open on the kitchen table, the TV murmuring in the background. His feet hadn't moved. Neither had his body, and certainly neither had the needle on his scale. The chair had become his safe zone. After all, it didn't ask much of him. No pain, no effort, just the quiet hum of routine. But beneath that comfort was something quietly corrosive: stillness. Before breakfast, your body is in a strange kind of readiness. It's been fasting all night. It's more sensitive to movement, to light, to oxygen. Every small action is amplified. That's why this period, this window before the first bite, is so powerful for people over 75. It's when fat-burning pathways are most easily triggered, but only if you move. When you stay seated, especially in the hour after waking, your muscles stay cold. Blood circulation slows. Insulin becomes sluggish. And the older body, which already fights to keep balance, reads this as a signal to store, to prepare for more sitting, to defend, not release. Frank didn't realize it, but every morning he sat in stillness. His body was quietly choosing fat storage over fat burn. His metabolism wasn't broken. It was confused. It took just one change to start rewriting that story. Standing. That's right, standing. He didn't need a gym. He didn't need motivation. All he needed was to change the message he was sending his body. I'm awake. I'm alive. I'm ready to burn, not store. He began with small steps, standing as the coffee brewed, walking a slow loop around the living room while waiting for toast, stretching his arms while watching the sun rise. That was it. But something subtle started happening. His ankles stopped swelling. His cravings shrank. He didn't feel ravenous when breakfast came. His body had already begun to metabolize differently because it had been told to. There's a deep irony here. The older we get, the more movement we need, but the more comfortable stillness becomes. And yet, comfort can lie. It tells you you're okay when you're not. It whispers that rest is healing, even when it's turning into harm. Frank's chair wasn't evil. It was just overused, misunderstood. And once he changed his relationship with it, even slightly, his body began to respond like it hadn't in years. Not with a dramatic transformation, but with something better. Momentum. A morning rhythm. A gentle pulse that said, "You're not stuck. You're just still. And you don't have to be." That's when he looked at breakfast differently. Because now, he understood what came before it was doing far more than he ever imagined. For most of his life, Frank believed he was doing the right thing. Whole grain toast, a small bowl of oatmeal, a banana sliced neatly on top, maybe a little orange juice, just a splash. Heart healthy, the doctor once called it. Clean eating, his granddaughter said with a smile. But something wasn't right. Within an hour, Frank would feel heavy, not full, just tired. His belly would swell a bit, and by 10:30 his hands would start to tremble slightly, searching for a snack. He couldn't understand it. He was following the rules. Why did his belly keep growing? What he didn't know, what so many people over 75 don't know, is that a breakfast that used to be healthy for your 40-year-old self can quietly sabotage your body today. As we age, our insulin response becomes more fragile. The same foods that once gave us energy now cause spikes and crashes. Oatmeal, toast, even fruit, when eaten alone early in the morning, can flood the bloodstream with sugar. And in an older body, that sugar doesn't get used. It gets stored, right in the belly. Frank's healthy breakfast was turning off his fat-burning switch before the day even began. He started learning something that changed everything. It's not about the calories. It's about the message your food sends, and that message is clearest in the morning. His banana wasn't bad, his oats weren't evil. But together, at the wrong time and without balance, they were triggering a cascade of storage hormones. His body, already sensitive from age, took that spike as a threat and responded by hoarding fat, slowing energy, and demanding more sugar by mid-morning. That's why Frank often felt hungrier after breakfast than before. His body wasn't nourished. It was confused. The breakthrough came not from removing breakfast, but from rebalancing it, adding a little fat, a little protein, drinking something bitter before eating, waiting 20 minutes after waking before his first bite. These small tweaks changed how his body processed the meal and how he felt afterward. Suddenly, he could go until lunch without grazing. His energy didn't dip. His stomach stayed calmer, and his cravings, once noisy and constant, began to quiet. It wasn't a diet. It wasn't a restriction. It was a conversation. One where he finally started listening to what his body had been trying to say for years. If you've ever felt worse after a healthy breakfast, if you've ever looked at your plate and wondered why the scale keeps climbing, Frank's story might sound familiar. Have you ever felt hungrier after eating breakfast than before? Tell me in the comments. You're not alone. The first time Frank drank it, he didn't expect much. It looked simple, almost too simple to matter. Just a clear glass with a few things stirred in. No powders, no pills, no promises. Just a quiet ritual before the coffee, before the toast, before the day began. But that one glass was a message. And it's the message that changed everything. What Frank learned, and what so many people overlook, is that hydration isn't just about avoiding thirst, especially not after 75. It's about priming the body, preparing the inner engine, giving every organ, every cell, every fat-burning mechanism the green light to turn on. The drink wasn't magic, but the timing, the ingredients, and the intention, that's where the power lived. Here's what was in it. Warm water, a squeeze of fresh lemon, a pinch of sea salt, and a dash of apple cider vinegar. Together, these simple ingredients did something remarkable. They woke up his digestion without spiking his insulin. They gently nudged his liver to begin detoxing. They supported hydration at the cellular level, something plain water alone often fails to do in older adults. And they told his metabolism, The day has started. Let's begin. For years, Frank had been starting his day with coffee, and only coffee. He thought it gave him energy, but in truth, it was dehydrating him, aggravating his cortisol, making him feel alert for an hour, then sluggish for 5. This one glass broke that cycle. The lemon provided vitamin C and digestive enzymes. The vinegar supported blood sugar regulation. And the salt, just a small pinch, helped retain hydration and balance minerals, especially important as aging kidneys become less efficient. But more than that, the ritual gave Frank something to do with purpose. It was no longer just about waiting for energy to arrive. It was about activating it. Within days, the effects became clear. His bloating shrank. His belly felt flatter by noon. He stopped waking up feeling dry-mouthed and dizzy. His digestion improved. Even his skin looked brighter. And breakfast? It began to taste different, more satisfying, less urgent. His body no longer felt desperate when food arrived, because it had already been nourished, gently, from the inside out. Sometimes, the smallest shifts are the most powerful, not because they're flashy, but because they speak the language of your body, a language it hasn't heard in years. For Frank, this glass was more than hydration. It was a beginning, a reset, a quiet revolution that happened before 8 a.m., and it made everything after feel lighter, smoother, possible. Frank had always carried a quiet guilt, when the stairs made him breathless, when tying his shoes felt like bending a mountain, when he'd start the day with the best of intentions, only to find himself back in the chair before 10 a.m., exhausted. He blamed himself, thought he wasn't trying hard enough, but the truth was far more human and far more common. Frank wasn't lazy, he was inflamed. Chronic, low-grade inflammation is one of the most silent, misunderstood barriers to fat loss in older adults. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It settles quietly into the joints, the gut, the belly. It shows up as stiffness, as fatigue, as a body that feels heavy, even when the scale doesn't budge. It's not about pain. It's about friction, the invisible kind that wears down your energy, day after day, until even simple tasks feel overwhelming. And the worst part? It often starts in the morning, when the body wakes up dehydrated, stiff, and flooded with blood sugar from the wrong breakfast. Inflammation rises. Cortisol, the stress hormone, stays high. Insulin gets confused. And fat, especially around the belly, clings harder. Not out of rebellion, out of self-defense. Frank's body wasn't failing him. It was protecting him from years of quiet stress, poor sleep, processed foods, and lack of recovery. It was doing what it thought it had to do, but that doesn't mean it couldn't change. When Frank began his new morning rhythm, hydrating, moving gently, choosing better balance in his breakfast, he didn't just lose fat. He lost the fog, the tightness, the "I just don't feel like myself anymore" that had haunted him for years. His joints loosened. His energy lifted. His face softened, not because he was trying harder, but because the inflammation was retreating. What most people don't realize is that fat loss after 75 isn't just about eating less or moving more. It's about creating a body that wants to let go, and an inflamed body holds on, tight. Frank didn't need discipline. He needed relief, and that relief began not with a new exercise or a strict diet, but with one question. What if I'm not lazy? What if I'm inflamed? That shift in perspective opened the door to everything else. It gave him compassion, it gave him clarity, and it gave his body the chance to heal, to shed, to breathe. It's not weakness to feel tired, but it is healing to ask why, and to gently start doing something about it, one soft morning at a time. Frank didn't join a gym. He didn't buy expensive shoes or sign up for a program. His knees wouldn't have allowed it anyway. But one morning, as the water boiled and the light spilled gently through his kitchen window, he did something he hadn't done in years. He walked, not outside, not far, just up and down the hallway of his home. Slow, barefoot, quiet, 8 minutes. That was it. It began as a way to pass time while his tea cooled. But within days, it became something else entirely. A ritual, a reset, a small act of motion that changed the shape of his days and the shape of his body. Here's what most people don't realize. The human body, especially in its later years, doesn't need intense movement to activate fat burning. It needs consistent, gentle motion at the right time. And the most overlooked time is right before breakfast. Frank's hallway walk, slow and unassuming, did more for his metabolism than 30 minutes on a treadmill ever had. Why? Because it worked with his biology. Before eating, the body is still in a fasted state. Blood sugar is low, insulin is calm, and the fat-burning mechanisms are more sensitive. A short, relaxed movement in this window signals the body, burn stored fuel, use the fat. Not in a punishing way, but in a natural, fluid way the body actually prefers. And it wasn't just the fat. That hallway walk began to loosen his joints, wake up his lungs, settle his nerves. It gave his body something it had been craving for years, gentle circulation. It also gave him a moment to check in, to feel his feet on the ground, to let the tension melt from his shoulders, to be present, not in front of a screen or a scale, but inside his own breath. And perhaps most importantly, it was achievable. Because when you're over 75, motivation isn't found in hype. It's found in safety, in knowing that what you're doing won't hurt, won't leave you breathless, won't push you past the edge. It will meet you where you are, and slowly, quietly, take you somewhere better. That hallway became Frank's morning path back to himself. He didn't need a treadmill. He needed permission to move gently, to trust his body again, to believe that something as simple as 8 minutes could be enough. And it was. Frank had been patient, or at least, he tried to be. 10 days into his new morning routine, he felt different, clearer, less bloated, more in control. But every morning, the number on the scale stared back at him, unchanged. It was frustrating, quietly defeating. He had been here before, the hope, the effort, the small changes. And yet, nothing to show for it. It felt like a trick, like maybe age really had locked the door, and no habit, no matter how gentle or consistent, could open it. But something was happening under the surface. The truth is, fat loss after 75 doesn't follow the rules we were taught in younger years. It's not linear. It doesn't reward effort with instant results. It starts by repairing, balancing hormones, reducing inflammation, restoring hydration. That's why the first sign of progress often isn't in pounds lost, but in how you feel when you wake up. And that's what Frank was missing at first. His body wasn't stuck. It was preparing. On day 11, the scale dropped, just half a pound, but it broke the silence. The next morning, it dipped again. By day 15, Frank had lost 3 pounds, without hunger, without punishment, just rhythm, just care. But more importantly, his body felt trusting. It no longer resisted. It responded. The belly that once felt heavy and unmovable now softened. The face that seemed puffier each year began to sharpen slightly. He could see his own eyes again. This is the moment where many give up, right before the shift begins. Because we've been taught that progress must be visible to be real. But real transformation starts invisibly. Your body, especially after decades of stress, illness, or neglect, doesn't want quick fixes. It wants safety, proof that it can begin to let go. And that takes time. Frank's fat loss didn't begin with a number. It began with a message. You're safe now. You're being cared for. You don't need to hold on anymore. That's what the body needs to hear. And when it does, it moves. Not just in pounds, but in freedom. So if the scale hasn't moved yet, don't assume nothing is happening. Ask yourself instead, do I feel less foggy? Do I crave less? Do I sleep better? Those are the signs, the real ones. And they come before the mirror shows anything. Frank almost missed that. He almost quit on day 10. But because he didn't, he learned something that changed everything. Sometimes the weight doesn't drop until your body finally feels safe enough to let it go. Frank hadn't said much during his checkup. He sat quietly, as usual, while the nurse took his blood pressure and asked about his sleep. He shrugged, mentioned the walks, the new morning habit, the glass of lemon water. Nothing dramatic. But when the doctor looked at his chart, his eyes narrowed, his blood sugar lower, his waistline smaller, his blood pressure more stable. Even his inflammation markers, those quiet signals of the body's distress, had dropped. "Frank," the doctor said, tilting his head, "what are you doing differently?" And for the first time in a long time, Frank smiled, not with pride, but with relief, because it wasn't about one big change. It was about many small choices, strung together before 8 a.m., that made the rest of the day easier, lighter, kinder to his body. The irony is, we often look to medications or diets to fix what morning patterns quietly break. We treat the symptoms but ignore the signal, and yet, the body responds faster to rhythm than to restriction, especially in age. What shocked Frank's doctor wasn't the weight loss. It was the metabolic shift. His numbers told the story of a body working with itself again, hormones balancing, inflammation calming, energy becoming consistent, and that's not something you get from a pill. The secret? It wasn't in what Frank added. It was in what he stopped doing. He stopped flooding his system with sugar first thing in the morning. He stopped sitting in silence for hours before moving. He stopped skipping hydration. He stopped waiting for energy to find him. These small acts of stopping, of creating space instead of clutter, allowed his biology to do what it was built for: heal, regulate, and burn fuel instead of storing it. And what's most surprising is how quietly it all happened. No one noticed at first. Not his neighbors, not his friends. But Frank noticed. In the mirror, in the way his belt fastened, in the calm he felt after breakfast, in the fact that, for the first time in years, he didn't dread the doctor's office. That's what happens when change is aligned with your biology, not against it. It doesn't crash in like a storm. It rises like the sun, subtle, dependable, life-giving. So when his doctor asked that question, Frank didn't list a program or a product. He just said, "I changed how I start my day." And that was enough. Frank could handle sore legs. He could handle changing what he ate, moving a little more, even skipping the sugary breakfast he once loved. But the hardest part, the real mountain, believing he could still change. There's something that happens quietly after a certain age. A soft, internal resignation. A voice that whispers, maybe this is just how it ends. Maybe nothing works anymore. It doesn't scream. It doesn't argue. It just settles. Like dust. Until hope feels foolish, and effort feels like a memory from another life. That's where Frank had been. Not in his body, but in his mind. He had tried before. He had counted calories, taken walks, tried advice from people half his age, who didn't understand what it felt like to wake up stiff, to feel invisible in your own family, to carry the weight of time. So when he decided to try again, he wasn't just facing old habits. He was facing shame, the fear of failing again. The voice that said, "Who are you kidding? You're too late." That's what made the first morning so important. Not because it was perfect, but because he did it. He drank the glass. He stood instead of sitting. He walked for 8 quiet minutes, alone, with doubt still heavy on his shoulders. But he did it anyway. And with each passing day, that doubt began to lift, not because of a number on a scale, but because of what he proved to himself. That change was still possible. That discipline wasn't gone. That dignity wasn't lost. We often talk about willpower as if it's a muscle. But for people like Frank, over 75, it's more like memory. A deep remembering that you're still capable, still worthy, still here. The physical changes came later. The mental shift came first. He started speaking to himself differently, not with blame, but with curiosity. Not, "Why can't I do this?" but, "What if this time is different?" And the truth is, it was. Because he wasn't trying to become young again. He wasn't chasing youth. He was honoring his age, working with it, not against it, giving it what it needed. And in return, it gave him back something precious: confidence. So many people quit because they're waiting to feel ready. But readiness isn't a feeling, it's a decision. One tiny act of faith in the morning, repeated until it becomes a rhythm. Have you ever felt like it was too late to start again? You're not alone. Share your story in the comments. It matters more than you think. Every morning, without saying a word, your body makes a choice. It doesn't wait for breakfast. It doesn't wait for motivation. It reads the signals you give it before the clock strikes 8 and decides, am I going to burn fat today or store it? For years, Frank didn't realize he was answering that question. Every time he skipped hydration, every time he sat still, every time he reached for toast or cereal without balance, his body took that as a cue: store, hold, protect. But once he understood that morning was a message, everything changed. It's not just about food. It's not just about movement. It's about the tone you set for your day. And that tone, especially after 75, has the power to shift your entire metabolism. By changing what happened before breakfast, Frank changed how his body responded to breakfast. He created a gentle storm of signals: hydration, movement, stable blood sugar, that told his body, you're safe, you have energy, you can let go. And it did. That's the quiet miracle of this routine. It doesn't force, it invites. It reminds the body of what it once knew: how to burn, how to move, how to restore. It's not youth you're chasing, it's vitality, and that doesn't disappear with age. It only hides. Frank found his again in the stillness of his kitchen, in the steps down his hallway, in the soft power of routine. His belly shrank, his energy lifted, his doctor was stunned, but most of all, he was different. He felt trusted by his own body again. That's the choice you face each morning. Not a punishment, not a program, a path, one step at a time. So tomorrow, when you wake up, remember, the first 60 minutes are not just about starting your day. They're about telling your body what kind of day it's going to be, one of storage or one of release. Which of these morning shifts surprised you the most? Share your story in the comments. It might be exactly what someone else needs to hear.